For joining us on our new podcast, Sparking a Conversation. This podcast is produced by the Drake University's Sponsored Program Administration and Research Compliance Office. My name is Preston Miller, and I'll be the host of this podcast. Today we have Jerrid Kruse and Lindsay Woodward from the School of Education. They recently have been awarded a $628,000 grant through the National Science Foundation for their proposal titled Engaging Elementary Teachers in Developing Culturally Relevant Instructional Materials Promoting Socio-Scientific Literacy. I'd now like to hand the floor off to our guest. Would you folks please be able to tell us a bit about what you do here at Drake?
Hi, Preston, thanks so much for having us today. I am an associate professor of secondary literacy at Drake. I'm currently the department chair of our teaching and learning department. Teaching in both our undergrad and graduate programs, and have really been able to partner with my colleague, who you'll meet here in just a moment, in the area of disciplinary literacy. So really thinking about how we're leveraging reading, writing, speaking, and listening to make science instruction more relevant to students and to support teachers as they are planning and designing and assessing their instruction.
I'm Jerrid Kruse. I'm also in the School of Education. Mostly my job is science education. So I'm working with pre-service and in-service teachers in both undergraduate and graduate spaces on how they can teach science better. And this project is specifically about elementary teachers. So I'm working with elementary and secondary teachers in my time here at Drake, and Lindsay's expertise on, especially at the elementary level, on how literacy and science interact. Like her expertise in science disciplinary literacy really provide a unique lens, I think, for how do we get more science done at the elementary level.
Thank you. And thinking about this project a little bit more, could you just tell us what sort of work that you'll be doing throughout this project, perhaps individually or as a group?
Yeah, so the project's main goal is to support practicing teachers in teaching science better, specifically 5th grade and then 4th grade. So this first year, we are engaging 5th grade teachers in the Des Moines metro area in some professional development, weekly professional development for basically starting now until the end of the school year, around just how do we do science better? Like, what does the research say about teaching science well? We're focusing pretty closely on a particular construct called socio-scientific issues. And these are issues in science that usually have like a moral or ethical component. And so we're trying to, but then have connections to science and society, and just thinking about like, how do we make science more relevant? Because just learning the science for science sake is, I might find that really valuable as a science person, but a lot of kids and a lot of teachers may not find that valuable. So trying to connect it, okay, we're learning this science so that we can better understand this issue that's going on in our world. So that PD happens during the school year, and then over the summer, those same teachers will be engaged in some curriculum work, and they're not necessarily creating curriculum from scratch. Like, we know that teachers are increasingly required to use particular curriculums that their district invests in, and so during that summertime, they're gonna bring in their curriculum. We're gonna look at it and try to, together with the teachers and Lindsay and I and graduate students who are on the project, look at, okay, so what can we do within the parameters of this curriculum, within the parameters of your district to do better with respect to science? And then next year we'll start with 4th grade, and then we'll do 4th grade, the same process. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Lindsay, but that's kind of the overview.
I think you covered it.
Fabulous. And what particularly inspired you folks to pursue this area of interest?
Lindsay, you want to start that one?
Yeah, I do. So I think that this is interesting, both as relevant to our project, Preston, but then also, as how this kind of work gets done. Jerrid and I have been writing grants together, I don't know, since my 2nd or 3rd year at Drake. I mean, for years. We really kind of connected in terms of both valuing, I really value the perspective that Jerrid takes to science instruction. And it's not something that we see always happening in elementary and secondary schools. I think he really saw a connection with me in terms of, like I was talking about, those literacy skills and how those really can be leveraged for science instruction, not reading instruction, but science instruction. So we've thought about this idea in a number of different forms. We've written a piece together with a grad student on science and disciplinary literacy. So really refining it over several years, I think, is one of the ways to think about how we pursue this area of interest. It comes from both of our individual lines of scholarship and then several years of talking and refining and applying for grants.
Yeah, for me, like Lindsay's right. Like this is the culmination of years of work and chatting together and brainstorming ideas together and writing. But if I go back in time as to like why have I developed this interest at all, I think it just, like, some of the research shows that most people who become scientists, who go into a scientific or technology or engineering field, become interested in that field or the related field by fourth grade. And then we have we have that knowledge, and then we have this trend and this is a nationwide trend, of less and less science instruction happening at the elementary level. So that becomes a problem, because if you're not being exposed to science at any level, well, and then you get past fourth grade before you even are introduced to science, because a lot of times some kids weren't getting any science instruction until sixth grade. It's too late, which is unfortunate. And so really it's about expanding access and opportunity for kids. And not because I think everybody should become a scientist, but I think people should know that it's an option. And so really it's about how do we get more and better science instruction happening at the elementary level. And then obviously with the importance that is placed on literacy, it's like, for me, there's kind of this like kind of back door in, like we can do literacy, but we can also do science really well at the same time, which is where, Lindsay and I's collaboration has been really, really helpful.
Fabulous. And kind of segueing off of that, what do you see as the potential impact that your research will have on your fields?
Well, in science education, I think this is a problem we are all wrestling with, is how do we do science better at the elementary level? Like when I talk to my colleagues across the country and even internationally, those are issues that we're wrestling with, is how do we get more science in the classrooms at the elementary level? There's lots of things that are contributing to that. A lot of times elementary teachers don't feel comfortable with science, and a lot of times it's because of negative science experiences they had as a student. And so we're trying to overcome those hurdles. And I think this project will provide another avenue to maybe help teachers see how they could do science in interesting ways that also has strong connections to other things and other things they're trying to do with kids. Especially when you start talking about that socio-scientific issues lens. One of the things we hope to come out of this project is that the curriculum work that the teachers do in the summers turns into freely available materials, whether that's through like articles that get published in practitioner journals for teachers, or even just stuff that we host online, so that it creates a repository of, here's a really good activity that's standards aligned, goes beyond just the content, brings in other disciplines. And so that to me is like the field that I'm probably most concerned about is the classroom, right? Like, how are we helping the teachers in the classroom do better?
So I think I would share that, I think what Jerrid discussed is really kind of the primary focus and where the largest potential impact is likely to reside as our project. But I think an important additional component is this kind of backdoor literacy way that Jerrid was talking about earlier. In literacy, our current kind of paradigm, especially for thinking about how to support specific content areas like science in the elementary field, is really to dominate literacy. So we're privileging literacy, the reading and writing skills, and then maybe we're trying to do some science within that. Let's read about a particular scientific topic. And we know that we're engaging students in these socio-scientific issues from social studies lens, from, English language arts lenses, those kinds of things. So I think our project has a lot of potential to really shift that paradigm to say, actually, let's teach science and recognize all of the literacy that we're teaching as part of the science instruction rather than privileging the literacy instruction. which, as you can imagine, I mean, that's hard for me as a literacy professor to accept, but it's also, as Jerrid says, it's really what we need to what our students need right now.
For that. And thinking about the project a little bit more regarding impact to our campus, what particular benefits will this project bring to Drake?
That's a good question. There's the dollars and cents of it, right?
Of course.
There's the indirect costs that will benefit Drake just from money coming in. But I think also we're creating opportunities for graduate and undergraduate students. So there's the participants, the people who are getting the PD. I think that's like they're coming to campus, they're in the classrooms, they're working with Drake faculty and staff. So I think there's a connection between the community, increasing the connection between the community, the local community, and Drake University. So I think there's that piece with the participants. But then the graduate students and the undergraduates, there's at least two of the 3 graduate students that are going to be working on this project, and we actually are going to hire more in the years 2 and 3, would not have come to Drake to graduate school had it not been for these funds. And so we're bringing in, graduate students, but then the undergraduates that are working on the project, they were already at Drake, but they're getting a unique experience to be working on an NSF funded project and doing some high level research in the field of education. And hopefully they all get publications out of it too.
And then there's always the additional point of anytime we can increase the visibility of teachers in our community, and there's, as Jerrid was saying, their strong connections to Drake, the more likely they are to suggest Drake as those students are looking for colleges, and to have those students start their undergraduate experiences with us. So I think that there's a lot of those kind of intangibles because our participants are teachers in the Des Moines metro, that have, potentially lasting implications for the university. Not to overstate our potential, but
No, I think you guys may be understating in some effects, and thank you for everything that you folks do. Now, thinking about the grant application itself a little bit, and for people who are seeking out National Science Foundation grant or something of the likes, were there any particular challenges that you faced during this grant application process that you would like to share, maybe provide any sort of advice?
So I've got one really big thing that I think I probably should have known, but I didn't. They say in the request for proposals and things like that to make sure there's parts of it that are written for a non-expert audience, right? And what I've really learned to understand that means is it can't be too complex, right? The objectives and processes of the project need to be really clear, and even I would maybe go so far as to say somewhat simple. We submitted a version of this grant that had social scientific issues is a complex topic, and so what we did is we provided a lit review that went into 10 different facets of how people think about socioscientific issues. And it became clear in the reviews of that round, right? That one was not funded, that people were getting hung up on some of those details. And so one of the things we did this time around is we simplified to just 2 aspects. And the program officer actually came back to us and said, hey, would you consider limiting to just 1 aspect? And we'll give you more money, right? So it was actually make it even more simple, and we'll fund it at a higher level. And I think that has lots. There's clarity, there's ensuring that the project actually is successful, right? Because they don't want to give money to something that's overly complex and may not work, right? If there's too many pinch points, then they rightly have concerns that if one of those pinch points goes wrong, then the whole project falls apart. So really making clear that there's a very clear plan of action that's fairly simple in design, because then I think they can have faith that it'll get accomplished. What's nice is that really complex lit review actually turned into a paper that we just got published in one of our top journals in science education, and so it wasn't a complete waste.
Fabulous.
So I don't know if you want to add anything, Lindsay, but that's probably my biggest takeaway is ensure that they're understanding how likely it is that this is going to be successful.
And I think for me, absolutely, I completely agree with you. And I think I would add, in terms of the process, that that it really is kind of dynamic, right? That program officer is coming back to us, making suggestions, and then, Jerrid and I have got a 48-hour turnaround. I mean, he's rewriting narratives, and we're on the phone, and we're not even together, and it's this very really long, but also this kind of, you need to be able to adjust your project in a way that makes sense if it does, but on a really fast timeline, and then just hold and wait for weeks and weeks at a time. And so, I mean, not necessarily an unexpected challenge. I think that most funding agencies work that way. For ours, we sent this grant application back in November, and I think got it accepted the 4th week of August here in 2024. So, which was not what we expected. That was not the timeline. Whatever timeline we were expecting, it wasn't exactly that, given that we wanted our participants, our teachers, who are also starting their school year in the fall. So just being kind of ready and open to that idea and having done some of the thinking, so you can be a little nimble as funding sources requests new and different approaches and information from you, would probably be another challenge to look out for.
Another thing I might, and I don't know if this had any impact on whether or not we got funded, but there was one of my goals with funding has always been like funding like graduate students, right? Like kind of a pay it forward. Like I was fortunate enough when I was a graduate student to work on an NSF funded project, so I didn't have costs associated with my doctoral level graduate school. So I've been trying to pay that forward. And so for a short period, maybe a 2 or 3 year period, I was submitting a lot of grants. And they were things that I'm interested in that would be a cool research project, but it's not necessarily my passion. And then I started thinking about why did I get into higher ed? I got a very loud truck driving past me. Give me a second. So that I started remembering why I left K-12 instruction, because I love teaching kids, and it was to help teachers do better in their classrooms. And so once I realigned all of my grant activities toward how do I help teachers do better in their classrooms. And, I don't know if maybe that comes through in my writing, like the passion, right? Like the fact that I really care about this issue, because I think there is a salesmanship to the grant writing process. And if you're not super passionate about a project, I think that's going to show in the writing.
No, thank you for that. And I think moving a bit forward, and after this grant is complete, how does receiving this particular grant influence your future research goals or objectives?
So I can talk about this a little, because I think it changes my trajectory a little more than it does Jerrid. You've heard him talking about this is really in line with kind of how a lot of the work he's done for a long time. As a literacy scholar, much of my previous work has been in technology integration and literacy, but then also I've always had a commitment and an interest to professional development and supporting teachers in their classroom instruction. So that's something that Jerrid and I have always shared. And I think for me, a grant of this magnitude and this longitude really does shift kind of some of my future thinking more into those connections with science instruction than it probably would have without our grant together.
Yeah, for me, like Lindsay said, this is very much in line with the trajectory I was heading on anyway. So I don't know that it changes much, other than it maybe starts getting me thinking about long-term planning. How do we extend this project, right? Because this project is just 4th and 5th grade. Do we go up to middle school? Do we go down to third and 2nd grade? Or we're going to learn things from this grant. Because there are options to scale up, or we go from the number of participants we have to working with entire districts or something, right? So I think that's really going to be depending on what we learn from this project and the impact that we see it having as to how do we go forward from here is the question that we're going to be wrestling with over the next couple of years. But yeah, that's probably where I'm thinking is the long term, because both Lindsay and I are still pretty early in our careers. So where do we go next?
Oh, and thank you. And then just one last question for you folks. And you speak about you folks being earlier in your careers, but for individuals who have never jumped into a grant before or jumped into that space, what would be one singular piece of advice that you could give an individual who is just venturing into the grant realm?
So I think for me, I appreciate your question, Preston. A singular piece of advice. My previous grant grant work was solo. I was the solo PI on that. And I think working with Jerrid, having a collaborator to think through things and to partner with has truly made my work better and has made it more enjoyable. So I think even if you're just starting out and wanting to write a grant on your own, making sure that you find that colleague or mentor or someone who really helps you refine your thinking and to help that application be funded and be successful in a competitive space is probably the most important, the singular piece of advice. I could give a lot of advice. That would be my singular piece of advice.
Yeah, I maybe have two. I don't know that I'm going to be able to come up with a singular one. I think the first one is just like try it, right? I think there's probably a lot of faculty members who have perfectionist tendencies, right? Like I certainly do, and so I think we get stuck and like this isn't 100% ready to go, and so then we miss the deadline. I think, but at some point, like submitting it, getting feedback, like you learn the process, you learn how it works, you learn the kinds of things they're looking for, what confuses reviewers, what doesn't confuse reviewers. I mean, and it's very similar to like publishing, right? Sometimes you just got to send it out so you can get the peer review feedback and you figure out what's wrong with it so you can fix it. Lean into that process. So try it. And then the other thing, I don't know if this is a recommendation, but it's certainly something that I've done, is I do a lot of stuff with smaller grants, right? So I probably have like 3 or 4 smaller grants going on right now, and those have just been like they give you new ideas, right? They let you try things and they let you refine things, and Drake has some internal granting sources, but even just there's some external ones too, right? Like in science for Iowa, there's the NASA Iowa Space Grant Consortium that I've had a few funded projects from, and those are in the $10,000 range, so not much money, but it allows you to start working on something that maybe informs a later bigger project.
Thank you. And thank you thank you both for your time. I think both you folks really, really exude that persistence and continuing to try and apply and refine your work shows that eventually you will succeed. And do you folks have any last words you'd like to share to any of your colleagues or faculty members amongst the campus?
We're not a big campus, so like if anybody has any questions, like, and I'm around.
Yeah,
happy to chat. Yep.
Fabulous. Well, thank you both, Jerrid and Lindsay, for your time, and thank you for everybody to listening into our first episode of SPARC'ing a Conversation.